Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you all. And so I'm going to walk over here a little bit so I'm not in the way of my slides. I'm going to speak for just a minute, make sure everybody can hear me. I'd like to use voice because that's a little bit easier, and hopefully you can hear me. I'm also open to using the text chat if anyone has questions. I do like to make sessions interactive, so I may be asking you a couple of questions, and then at the end we can certainly open up to questions if I haven't covered everything that you would like to know about Machinima. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm really honored to be able to come and speak with Lori here because Lori Bell was instrumental in my early years as an adopter of virtual worlds. I met her over 7 years ago in Second Life, and she's one of the early adopters for virtual worlds for libraries. And I came in and became very interested in this as a medium for librarianship and also for education. That led to my dissertation topic, which was factors contributing to the adoption of virtual worlds by librarians. And I do think that virtual worlds have a future, particularly for young people, as young students now are using virtual spaces more and more. Example, Minecraft. There are students as young as my kindergartners who are fascinated with Minecraft, and it's the most popular video game in the world. Educators are beginning to see the potential for utilizing virtual spaces for learning. So I think, those of us that have already seen how immersive learning can be such a fascinating, creative experience that has no boundaries as far as space, we understand the potential here. So that is who Valibrarian is. I'm Dr. Valerie Hill, but I chose, when I first came into Second Life, the name Valibrarian, since I'm called Val by many of my friends. And I came in as a librarian, and I wanted that clear in my name. I didn't know at the time what that even meant. There's a lot of psychology now with thinking about avatars and who you are online. I'm kind of glad I put that in my name because it clarifies my purpose here. Although the L word, library, is becoming kind of antiquated, for years I've heard that, iSchools, information science, information architect, the I word is definitely overtaking the L word, but I think for many of us, just the connotation of a library brings so much rich heritage as far as space for human beings to gather together for the purpose of learning and sharing stories and all types of communication, a kind of a hub. And so I do like the term library. So I chose the name Valibrarian, and I use that name on Twitter, on any virtual world or online space. That's the name on my YouTube channel. So if you want to look up some of my machinima, just search for Valibrarian. My role as a librarian has certainly changed very much in the last few years, particularly since I became interested in virtual worlds. And I'd like to say that my role now is more of an information literacy specialist than it is the librarian that you think of with handling primarily physical books. I do like to tell people that we now live in global participatory digital culture. And so being a librarian in global digital participatory culture is very different than being a librarian primarily in a physical library. So information literacy has rapidly risen to the top of my priorities as a librarian. And that led me to Machinima, because we're in virtual spaces. For many years as a school librarian, I was a K-5 elementary school librarian, I worked on a TV show once a week, editing a live news show. My 4th and 5th graders were my hosts and my reporters, and I would take all this footage home and edit it together on first VHS tapes and then eventually on DVDs and then eventually MP4s and onto YouTube. But I've always enjoyed the medium of video, and so when I saw that you could do that in a virtual world, it was just the perfect match for me. And another librarian early on, who I know Lori also will remember, that first introduced me and taught me Machinima was here on this slide, HVX Silver Star. And, you know, in a virtual space like this, we all help each other learn and share, because that's how we learn best, is through collaboration with others. And I began to learn what machinima was. It's a portmanteau, a word that combines two words, machine and cinema, which you probably already know. And it's capturing that video inside your computer to create a video just like you would any movie. And so my friend and colleague HVX and I worked together, and she began to teach me different things about machinima. Although I was familiar with video editing in the physical world and creating movies, it's quite a bit different when you're editing and creating movies in a virtual world. And I hope to explore and explain a little bit of those differences in my talk right now. So, but first I want to ask you, how many of you are already familiar with machinima, either having captured and created your own, or having watched some machinima and enjoyed machinima yourself, you know, viewing some online? If you would type a yes or a no or a brief phrase in the text chat, that just so I can know how familiar you are with machinima, if you've created any yourselves. Okay, I see we have some examples that people have viewed. Some of you are not familiar at all. It's great. It's really an exciting challenge to learn machinima, and there are so many great machinima online that people have done to document educational things as well as just artistic machinima. And I will have to say that young people are really beginning to do this. I have a Minecraft club in my school library, and when I first started my Minecraft club, this is my third year actually to do it. My very first year, I had fifth graders, so they're 10-year-olds, and I thought, well, they're going to be pretty impressed when I go inside Minecraft and I film a machinima of them. And this 10-year-old boy came up to me and he asked, so what kind of software capture tool do you use to post on YouTube? He asked me that, and I said, well, I use Fraps. And he said, oh, I use Bandicom on my YouTube channel. Here was a 10-year-old capturing machinima in Minecraft and posting it on YouTube. So students are already doing this. I think it's definitely time for the educational world to get involved and begin to see that there's a huge potential in virtual worlds and in archiving and capturing them through machinima. So first thing I want to ask you is whether you are most comfortable on a PC or a Mac, because of course it's going to be different depending on what type of platform you are going to be working in. So if you would type in the text chat PC or Mac, I can tell a little bit about those of you and what you're using. Great, I see PC and Mac, which is wonderful. I like to consider myself bi-platform. That's the term I use, although I don't know if it's a correct term or not. I like to be comfortable in doing things both on a Mac and a PC, and I kind of have them up side by side right now, even as we're talking, because they're so different in many ways. But I think it's nice to be able to be comfortable in both, since a lot of times I'm working with students, or here when I'm in Second Life, someone may be asking me a question, and if I don't know what the platform they're on, I can't really help them. So you'll see I have some note cards up here in these boxes. I'm walking over here towards the map box. If you're on a Mac, you can click on this box and get a little handout that will tell you a bit about machinima on a Mac. And then over on this box, if you click on it, you will see a handout note card with machinima tips for using a PC. And of course, this isn't everything you need to know about machinima, and you certainly don't have to use the screen capturing tools that I'm going to share, but it's a good start just to kind of get familiar with what is out there for your type of platform. Move around a little bit here and get my slides going. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the workflow of machinima. And before I do, I want to ask the question kind of why even make a machinima? I mean, why would we want to? And you know, there are so many reasons to create a machinima, and it's like each person has their own kind of vision or purpose or idea of what a machinima is. For me, since I've always done this TV show at school, and it was always about sharing educational resources to an audience, I brought that same thing into Second Life, and I've always wanted to capture what librarians and educators are doing in Second Life, almost as a reporter, and and then sharing that to archive. What are the great builds that people have made that are educational? But there are certainly other reasons to do machinima. I've seen some people just do digital storytelling. take a narrative and create a beautiful digital story. I've seen some people create digital poetry and take some of the beautiful things that are built in Second Life and sort of make a mixed, mashup of 3D objects and poetry and music all into a creative machinima. I've seen mixed reality machinima. I've made a few of those myself. In fact, that's what I did with my Minecraft. I had actual physical world shots of my students in Minecraft, and then inside of Minecraft, what they were building. They built a virtual library that was a quest for information literacy and digital citizenship. And so they had the library and a floating computer lab and a garden and all of these things that they had created. So I mixed it together into a mixed reality video. So there are lots of different reasons to make a machinima. And if you kind of begin to think about that, it's not just to document one thing that you go to in Second Life. It's great for filming historical reenactments, or, if you go to an event. I love that about this particular sim here on San Jose State University Island. There are so many really interesting historical events, and quite often you're wearing the Renaissance costumes, and that lends itself beautifully to machinima because you already have costumes and sets and things that you can document and just put right into a machinima. But there's just so many different reasons to do a machinima. I wanted to point that out first so you wouldn't just think that, it's one thing. But I will have to say, after having done filmed machinima now for quite a few years, it's great to capture this machinima, and it's a great experience to show people so that they get a feel of virtual worlds, or they are hearing a story in a different way, or feeling a poem or viewing art in a different way. But nothing beats the immersion of actually being in the world. It's having been in virtual worlds for a number of years, there is this sense of presence that you're actually in it. And so sometimes you can almost be nostalgic when you've made a machinima and you go back and view it. It's like, well, I was there. I experienced that, and you're reminiscing about it. And I'd like to see if anyone has ever done that. If you type a yes in a text chat, if you have ever reminisced about something you've done virtually in a 3D world, it's similar to reminiscing about something that you've done physically in the real world. And I think that's just an interesting concept. So if you want to type in the text chat if that's happened to you, that would be great. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about the workflow. Great. I see some of you have been in virtual worlds long enough to have experienced that. And so that's one of the really interesting things about machinima, is that it does capture kind of your memories, not just in a snapshot, but also in actual motion. So when you're thinking about the workflow of a machinima, just like you would in any movie, you're going to have all of those roles. You're going to have a director, actors, you're going to have an editor. You may have a producer. You can have all the roles you would in any type of movie making venture. But what's different, it's so different. I have learned it is so different, partially because virtual worlds are still in a really early stage. And so a lot of people who come in the virtual world do not have a full experience of the interface and the environment. So when I do a machinima, quite often I am the director. Sometimes I'm the actor. Sometimes, of course, I'm the editor. I have to play a lot of the roles myself, and so it's really quite different than working in the physical world, where you can just hand off these different roles and just talk about it and then go with it. And I have learned that sometimes it's easier to do a machinima myself, because when you get other people involved and you have a lot of the interface issues, people have different ideas and different angles, and it can get kind of complicated the more people that you get involved in creating a machinima, unless you are really sure of how experienced they are, and if they have the same amount of experience in a virtual world as the person creating the machinima. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get towards the editing process. But the basic overall workflow, of course, you're going to plan first. You have this idea, this concept, so the planning comes first, and preparing all of the shots. Having presets for how you're going to take this from your screen capture into some kind of editing software, so that you know that your tools are compatible. And then, of course, you want to capture your shots. And then you want to access those shots. And then after you've accessed all those shots, you're going to edit them in some way together into your machinima. And then you will be able to share those shots through publishing. and I'll talk about each one of these so you can kind of understand what the workflow is like. So I'm going to start first of all. I think I'll go ahead and go through a little bit first because I think I have capture in here. I'm going to go through to the planning, and I'll come back to this. When you're thinking about the planning stage, I think it's really important to think about storyboarding. I used a storyboard all the years that I was editing my weekly TV show. Even with these young kids, we'd do a storyboard and put all the different things in that we want, and then I would usually take it home to edit it on my computer at home. But before you even begin your storyboarding, you really have to have a purpose. A purpose for whatever this machinima is. And I think going along with your purpose, your theme, or your story, whether it's a theme that's just a poetic idea, or it's a full narrative, or it's a documentation, an archive of an event, or if it's sharing a learning, a talk that someone's doing, whatever it is, you've got to have your purpose. And I think you also need to keep in mind your target audience for that. For me, sharing my machinima, my target audience has always been fellow librarians and educators, because most of my machinima are documenting my exploration of virtual worlds for librarianship and for education. But sometimes that could be a story that anyone would want to see, but I think it's important to kind of think up front, who's my target audience? And then to have a basic outline, that's your classic storyboard. You want an outline that's going to have a beginning, a middle, and end, or a good hook opening for your audience, then the middle with whatever the transitions are going to have, and a good closure at the end. That's your basic outline or storyboard. And of course, you really want to understand what your message or your overall concept, what's your big idea that you want to have here in your machinima. That I think is the most important thing you need to be thinking about in the planning stages. And then as well, I think it's real important when you're doing your planning, as I said, to think about a good opening. Think about those sequences that you just really want to include, and think about a good close. I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about capture. On your note card, whether you're on a PC or a Mac, I've chosen some software capture examples, capture tools that I've had success with. Not to say they're the only ones out there. I've heard of several others that people are using, and so I'll just tell you the ones that I've had some success with. When I am filming on a PC, I use Fraps. And when I paid for Fraps, I first used the free version, and you can explore the free version, but you only capture very small video clips for free. But for someone who's just wanting to try it out, I would suggest downloading the free version of Fraps first and just trying it on a PC to see if you like it. It was not very expensive. I think I paid under $40 for my full version of Fraps, and I've used it for a long time, and it captures machinima really, really well. It captures in an AVI format. That's .avi. So that's what I use when I'm capturing on a PC. When I'm capturing machinima on a Mac, I use Snaps Pro X, which can be downloaded from ambrosiasw.com. And that, I think it cost around $60 for my Snaps Pro. And it's been really great, a great program to use on a Mac. Although I've heard recently a lot of people are using ScreenFlow, and that's got really good reviews from several colleagues that I know are using machinima on a PC. Or I know many people are using Camtasia, which may be available both on a PC and a Mac. I know it's a really popular screen capture tool. You can also capture using QuickTime Pro, and so there are a lot of different ways that you can capture your shots on both PC and Mac. But those are the two that I've had the most success with. So we talked a little bit about your storyboard and your planning and kind of the overall concept of your machinima. But I want to go back into this idea of the beginning and the middle and the end, and how it's real important to have that overall feel of what it is. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about something that can totally change your machinima. And I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. And I bet you guys can guess what it is. It is your choice of music. Music absolutely tells the story. And if you don't believe me, you can try this experiment. I've done a machinima before and put a certain song to it. And then I've taken that exact same machinima and changed the music to a completely different song. And it completely changed the whole feel, the whole idea of the machinima. It can take something and make it kind of almost wistful and romantic sounding, or it can take it to something really hip or really gritty or really kind of new age sounding. It can be really funny. The music will totally change the feel of your machinima. So that's just something, and I'm going to give you some ideas for how to choose music as we go along. So when you're starting this machinima, there's a lot of things to think about when you're setting up the shot. I like to think about, having the stage and the actors, and remembering that for me, I really like to have some really zoomed in close-up shots so that you have the feel of what it looks like up close, and I like to have some long shots so you really get an idea of the overall stage and the setting and where you are. Now I know that some people live stream. I've been to some live stream events in Second Life, and a lot of times when that happens, the person's camera is just like on the person talking. Like if you had a camera right on me right now and I'm just talking and my slide is there in the background, to me, if someone watches that, they certainly are not going to understand the feeling of being in a virtual world. In fact, if I'd never been in one, I would probably ask, why didn't you just go to a webinar? You'd have the slides up there and all the people could chat. Why do you have to be in a virtual world for that? Really, it's a good point. You do not have to be in a virtual world to see a slideshow. Absolutely not. A virtual world is so much more than that. I mean, we could be walking around right now. I could be sitting over here by somebody. I get this sense of presence of who I sit by and where I walk here. This is so much different than if I were on my computer with my webinar, where some of you you probably would be maybe folding laundry or doing something else while you're listening. I mean, I could just be on a radio talk show if I was doing that. Here, the whole point is the immersion. So, if I'm sitting by somebody, if I'm having you walk and follow me, I'd much rather have you stand up and walk and follow me to go do something than just stand here talking to you. But I want to point that out because when you're doing a machinima, it's not about getting this shot of me standing here by my slides. It's about capturing all these great builds that are all around us and the people that are moving in them and through them and what they're doing. So when you're at a live event in a virtual world, you want to capture all of that, the different people and what they're doing and the interaction. And I think this is going to get more and more important as virtual worlds grow into something that are not criticized as being as cartoonish as they are right now. But even in something like Minecraft, which to me is really, I cannot even believe this phenomenon. These kids are building with 3D blocks, and they're spending hours and hours and hours in there. And even adults, they're fascinated by the ability to build and create in Minecraft. And talk about cartoon looking, it's a bunch of blockheads. They don't even look like real people. But to me, what that says is people are born to create. It's innate in us. We love to create. And a 3D virtual world allows people to create and use their imagination in ways that are just not possible in the physical world. And Machinima can capture that. So I think that's what you want to capture in your Machinima, is the creativity that's going on here with the people, not just the person talking and their slides, for sure. So I wanted to point that out. Now, on my next slide here, I threw this in because I recently, just within the last 2 weeks, I was asked to do a machinima of an emergency management project, which is going to be at a conference next month. FEMA and a lot of emergency management specialists and workers around the country are going to this conference, and I was asked to film a machinima of emergency management rescue. And it was bombs going off. They had recreated San Antonio in the virtual world. But I wanted to point this out because this was one of the most difficult machinimas that I've filmed. The reason? I was given a script and actors and a director all to work with. And that is so much harder than filming it myself. I was up several nights till 2 in the morning on school nights. I mean, trying to get this done. And so I took this screenshot here, and this screenshot is just some of the the storyboard that I had to capture, and you'll see, you know, the person in the interior of the apartment sniffing water and dumping it in the kitchen sink because, you know, there's been contamination, and the ambulance pulling up to the hospital, and so taking these shots with other people in a virtual world, I'd have to say, I think it might even be more difficult than working in the physical world, because you not only you can't really see everything. You know, you're trying to work in 3D with all of these people, so it can be really challenging. So I wanted to point that out. When you're first starting Machinima, I would suggest that you do it yourself, you know, and practice and do it the way your own creative way before you get involved in a project with a lot of people, because it really can be a really big challenge. Okay, so I've already told you a little bit about the capture, but I want to back up here and mention that when you go to capture, depending on if you're on a PC or a Mac, you will have some shortcut keys that make it really easy when you're inside the virtual world. Of course, when you're in the virtual world, you want to hide all of the clutter, like your text chat, you know, that might be open, your inventory window, any HUDs you might have on. You might want to hide, you know, all of the name tags above people's names, all of the user interface, and you can find the shortcut keys to hide the user interface, or you can just crop it and edit that out later in your Machinima. I've done that as well. But when you're capturing on a PC, when you open up this software that I told you about, Fraps, the automatic default setting for your hotkey to start recording is F9. So here's what you do. You just open up that Fraps, you get in your virtual world, and when you hit F9, you will see that you're recording. There will be little yellow numbers, and you can see here on my slide the number 99 up there in the corner. There will be some little bright yellowish gold numbers that are on your screen, and then it'll turn red when you're recording, so you know that you're recording. And then when you hit that hotkey again, the F9, you'll stop your recording, and you've already got your shot. So that's how you do your capture on a PC. On a Mac, there are different shortcuts depending on your software. When I use my Snaps Pro, the command is to hit the Command key, the Shift key, and the 3 key at the same time. And it's kind of a fun program because it will say action, and then you know that you've started filming when you do the Command Shift 3. And then when you hit Command Shift 3 to close the shot, it will say cut, and then it will render and say that's a wrap. So you kind of get that little Hollywood effect in there with your shots. And so that's these two particular capture programs and how they work on your Mac or your PC. Then once you've captured those shots, it can be a little bit of a challenge to organize these shots on your computer. It's also important to know that they take up a lot of space, especially if you're using the AV files. On Fraps, these files are automatically saved as .avi, and those files are really, really huge. They will eat up your entire hard drive. So if you're going to get into Machinima and do quite a bit of Machinima, you might want to invest in an external hard drive and put all of your Machinima shots on an external hard drive, so you don't have to worry about space. A lot of times, once I've edited my final version of my Machinima, I just delete all the raw footage. And at first it was kind of hard because it's like, they're just awesome shots. I hate to throw them away, but you just cannot save. They're gigantic files, and they will just eat up your hard drive. The .mov files, which is the default setting on your Mac, are not quite as large, so you don't have quite the space issue, but still, all Machinima files are going to take up quite a bit of space. On the PC, when you are capturing in Fraps, those will automatically be saved right to your C hard drive, and the default on that is that there'll be a little file called Fraps, and you go inside Movies, and they will all be there. They'll just be named Second Life, and they'll have the date automatically, which is kind of nice because they're all by date, so you know where they are. They'll be in your C drive, unless you change that to an external hard drive. What sometimes I will do is just leave them there, and then I'll take them over to an external hard drive, after I've captured all my shots. Now on a Mac, you can see up here on the screenshot, it's a little bit different. You can choose where you want to put those files on your Mac, and then what I like to do is organize them in a file. I will give the file a name of the event so that I won't forget what that event was. Say it's a Renaissance fair, or it's a particular Second Life conference, whatever it is, I'll name that file so later it will be easy for me to go in and find those shots. So organizing your shots into folders so you remember where they are is really important, because sometimes, like for this emergency management machinima I just finished, I mean, I had hundreds of shots. I mean, they were just hundreds. And so it's, it gets really tricky when you have that many. You could easily forget and lose, where your shots are. So it's important to kind of organize those files. Okay, so let's say you've got your machinima, you know what it is you want to capture, and you've used your new software capture tool, and you've captured all these great machinima shots. Now, what are you going to do with them? You're going to want to edit them, and I have to say, editing is really a fun and creative process. And it's, to me, it is the secret to good storytelling in a digital format and to a good machinima. Because just sharing the raw footage, it's just like in creating a physical life video, there's a lot of boring scenes that need to be cut, I mean, a 10-minute real life video is just plain boring if it doesn't have any music and it doesn't have any, really good dialogue or really good editing. I think you can edit an hour down to maybe 3 minutes easily. You can take an hour of footage and edit it down to 3 minutes and really capture the whole thing well. Less is better. I mean, less is more, especially these days when people have such a short attention span on YouTube. People don't want to watch a YouTube video that's longer than 3 to 5 minutes. 5 minutes is long for a YouTube video. So I just want to point that out. So, I think it's important for us to think about narrowing it down, editing it down, getting down to the essential of what it is that you want to share. Now, I've put up here Adobe CS4. I think I'm now using a later version of Adobe, but this is my favorite editing tool. I know if you're on a PC, on a Mac, you may use iMovie. I do like iMovie as well, or Final Cut, which is what many Hollywood producers use, Hollywood editors for, the big screen. They use Final Cut and some of these great editing tools that now we all have at our disposal. Final Cut and Adobe Premiere can be a bit pricey, but you can get very inexpensive editing tools. iMovie, if you have a Mac, just pretty much comes on your Mac or even on an iPad. And Movie Maker, Windows Movie Maker can be a bit clunky, I've found, but there are other editors. There are quite a few editors they're not as expensive as some of the ones like Adobe. Both Adobe Premiere and Final Cut can be a little bit of a high learning curve because they have so many options within. I mean, anything you can think of, from green screen, special effects, tons of kinds of transitions are all built into these software tools. So it can be a little difficult to learn. But fortunately, there are so many forums online that if you get stuck with a certain question, you can go online and say, hey, I cannot figure out this particular tool, and you'll usually be able to solve that problem with other users who are familiar with the editing tool. As you can see in this screenshot, basically they all work the same. Over here, I'm going to walk over to the left-hand panel. Over here on the left-hand panel, you will usually have your files, which you can drop and drag into your timeline. And at the bottom, usually you have your video timeline and your audio timeline. And quite often, when you pull in these files, they will be linked together, your video and your audio. But you can split those apart, which I often do, because sometimes the audio isn't great. Sometimes people don't even use audio. Maybe they're just using text chat. So you can split those apart and put music in instead, which is really a good way to do machinima. And then maybe use a titler and put some words on there explaining what it is that people are talking about. I often do put some of the sound in if there are lines that people have said that really, fit what the concept of the machinima. I will use the audio. Or one tip is to do the audio separately and just create an MP3. I've done that many times in Machinima. If the audio is a little scratchy, or some people have good audio and some people's, is just not that great, you can insert an MP3 later, and that will clean it up and make the audio much nicer. So those are just a few of the tips in the editing process that will make it a little bit easier for you with your Machinima. As I said, here are some of the editing software that are popular and pretty easy to find. iMovie, Sony Vegas is one that a lot of people like, Windows Movie Maker, Final Cut, and Adobe Premiere. I also would like to talk to you, as I said, one of the things that absolutely make Machinima great is music. And as librarians, we understand it is critical for us to use copyright-free music and to credit our sources for music. So I always like to give some examples of great places where you can find really good music. Personally, I like to use instrumental music unless I find a song that has lyrics that really amplify the meaning of the machinima that I'm creating and just, you know, add to the meaning rather than detract. I don't use lyrics. I'll find instrumental music. One of my favorite sources is CC Mixter. I'm going to put that in text chat. It has tons of Creative Commons resources to use, and I do have on my website, which I have a portfolio. I try to gather a lot of different links to copyright-free resources, and there are a lot of these online. You can even find them, copyright-free and Creative Commons music that you can use as long as you credit the source. And I've found some great musicians this way. Jamendo is a really good place to get also, and you can. The one thing I do have one criticism of CC Mixer. It's not really great for the search. Sometimes I'll search for instrumentals and there's lyrics on there, or I'll search for a particular genre and they don't always come up exactly as I want. But there's great music there. Jamendo has a pretty good search tool. You can find, you know, by genre or even by musical instrument. And, you know, if you're looking for things like Baroque period or, you know, really old Renaissance type music, you can find really cool music on some of these copyright-free sites, which is really adds to your machinima. Okay, so then you've found your great music, which, by the way, on these sites, you just download the MP3, and then you can import that MP3 right into your project that you're working on. So that's, you know, that's how you do that. Some of the sites, it takes a little getting used to. Some of them you right-click on something, and you have to do save the target as, and some you just click a download button. But you know, once you get used to their site, it's pretty easy to download the music. And then you're going to want to share your video, and I know all of you are really probably know more places to share it than I've even put up here, because user-generated content has now become the most, you know, the most popular publishing format on the planet. We don't have as many things coming from traditional sources as we do from user-generated sources. And I've heard it said that YouTube is the #1 source of information on the planet. So YouTube is probably the place that most people are going to share their machinima. But there are other places like, you know, Blip TV or Vimeo. A lot of educators use Vimeo because it seems a bit more private without the you know, the ads and all the distractions on YouTube. But there are also ways to share your YouTube without those distractions. And, you know, you can even have people download the YouTube using a YouTube downloader, and then they could share it without having any of those ads or distractions on the side. But this is the best way to share your work, is by, you know, putting online so other people are able to access it. Oh, and by the way, I will put in the text chat a link to some examples of my let's see, I'll get an example here of my machinima. I've got a little playlist of machinima for education, so I'll put that in the text chat if you'd like to look at some of those machinima for education later. Some of them are library exhibits from the Community Virtual Library, where I worked on several different exhibits and captured them through machinima. So those are just examples of ways that you could use machinima to archive and share things that you've been involved in virtual worlds. I also wanted to point out, let me go back to that slide to point this out. I wanted to point out too that when I was talking about how it gets really difficult when you have a lot of people involved in creating a machinima, for me, I've kind of learned that I work in doing a machinima, I actually do it backwards. In the physical world, the way I created a video was coming up with my overall idea first, and then going and getting those shots. In a virtual world, I take the shots first because I don't really know what it is I'm going to get. Since I'm in a virtual world, you don't really know what it is. You don't really know what the people around you have built. You can't always anticipate what is going to happen. You don't even know what wonderful shots you're going to get. So I start with all the shots. And then as I'm looking at all the shots, quite often the great magical moments happen, and I realize, oh, look, this is a great shot, and then I understand what it is that I've captured, and then I'm able to edit it. Now, I don't know that everybody does it that way, but that's the way that it's worked for me. So I wanted to point that out because it's just really different than working in the physical world. And I think if I were a movie maker and I'd spent a lot of years, creating Hollywood films, I'd probably look at that differently. And I wouldn't be capturing in a virtual world in the same way. I'd hire actors, I'd hire someone to build the set. But here, since I'm not a Hollywood producer, I'm here to capture what's going on in a virtual world for education. And sometimes I have to be there and capture it to understand what it is, and then see what the magic is and what the moments are that I've captured. And then I edit those together, and then I try to share them. So just pointing out that it can be a different and unique creative process in whatever way you choose to use it. There's no one set way that you should use Machinima. This is a new world, and it's a new age, and it's full of creative possibilities. Now, if you've never done a Machinima and you'd like to create one really fast and get that excited feeling of, wow, it looks great, there is another way to do it. And that's it. I know you all know how to just take a screenshot. Type a Y in the text chat. Slap me a Y, one professor always says. Slap me a Y in the text chat if you have just taken a lot of screenshots or know how to take screenshots that you can share with colleagues. Well, one thing, and you've probably even done this, but you can always create your screenshots with music super fast and easy on some kind of a site like Animoto. So I'm going to, and I really almost consider this Machinima. I mean, it's screen captured video. So I'm going to share one in the text chat. This one, I just put an Animoto in. And it's from a different virtual world. Some of my librarian colleagues are exploring other virtual worlds outside of Second Life. I've grid hopped over to Reaction Grid and InWorlds and Unity and OpenSim and just Kitely. There's so many other virtual worlds. Of course, Second Life, I think we all agree, is number one for education in that it has the most tools and the most people involved. But it's interesting to visit other virtual worlds. So this Animoto that I just put in the text chat took place in InWorlds. A librarian colleague had a sci-fi exhibit, and I went there and just captured a few screenshots and then put some music over it to capture it. So if you're looking for a way to kind of capture and share without the learning curve of a lot of video editing, that's one easy way to create a video. But I do encourage you to think about Machinima and try it out, because it's a really great way to share and capture wonderful and beautiful and creative things that are happening in virtual worlds. Okay, so as I said, the tools and the formats, they're continuing to change. You probably have some other ideas of capturing tools that are now on the market. I'm sure there are going to be more and more. I've been doing this now for several years, and I'm thinking of trying out a few new capture tools myself. So next time I do a Machinima class, I may have a few to add to the list. I do want to see if any of you have a particular question for me about Machinima, for your own, if you're in the process of wanting to learn it for yourself, or about my experience with Machinima. I'm open to that. And while you're getting ready to ask a question, I was going to see if I have a link to some of those great copyright-free music videos. So I will be right back while you're thinking of your question.